son went to Israel the minute he heard the war broke out.
Okay, criticize as much as you like, but don't be a self-hating Jew. That's a different story.
And even when they were hanging him, he still shouted out, Heil Hitler.
So that matter, don't ask me about Zionist. It's silly! How can I say I am a Zionist?
Yeah, but that was hospital. Okay.
It's the Israeli army.
But isn't it the marriage that makes them I come from Meissen in Germany, East Germany. My parents were Polish and Russian, and I came with the Kindertransport. Actually, it was nearly the last Kindertransport which arrived here in Liverpool Street.
I was born in what is now the Czech Republic, and I lived in a small town called Klatovy, where my father was the leader of the Jewish community.
I come from Silesia, which is a part of Poland, and up till 1942 I was in a place called Sosnowiec, where there was quite a large community, quite a large Jewish community. And in 1942 I was arrested and taken to first the labor camp and then to a part of Auschwitz.
I was born in Poland, the 1st, the 12th, 1926. Things were very, very bad there. When a man earned £1, he was, or my uncle, he was going into the villages and buying a few chickens and some butter and bring it back. And they were happy when they got already one loaf of bread, they got another day to live.
I was born in Poland in 1928. My father was an eye surgeon. My mother was a very good housewife and looked after me. I attended various Polish schools, and I had a very rich grandfather with whom I spent all of my summer vacations, sheer heaven, and I was very spoiled, and this was up until 1939. This is when Adolf decided to pay me a visit.
I was born in Poland, naturally, came here in 1945, and I volunteered to fight in Israel in 1946, 47. I went as a volunteer to fight in Israel. There was fighting or destruction in all the time. We didn't just live. There was trouble. There was trouble from the Jewish police. There was trouble from the Germans. They could shoot the German police or they shoot. Even the Hitler Youth was beating up Jews, in particular bad at Jews, and killing them. They took everybody away. My family, you want to go?
You know, my family, they clear the ghetto up. You know, that time of year, otherwise, you know. But that moment, you know, and then naturally they took us to different places, you know. We went to Skaržisk, a place, and then we ended up in Buchenwald. From Buchenwald, we ended up in Theresienstadt. And that's where we were liberated by the Russians. May the 8th, you know. And then they brought us to England.
1939, the war broke out. And I don't know why my parents went into Warsaw. Warsaw was near where I was born. And, well, we had a hard time at first because suddenly out of our home, you know. And after a while, we went back to our hometown. And then they drove us out, really drove us out from our home. And back to Warsaw, to where the ghetto started. And I was in the Warsaw ghetto for not long, but at least about 3 or 4 months.
I got a terrible shock when the Germans invaded Czechoslovakia, and suddenly, as a Jewish family, we realized that our lives were going to change.
I've been in Auschwitz. I was getting so many beatings there that when I went to sleep, I prayed to God not to wake up in the morning.
But I used to go out to bring in food for my parents. And for this, somebody wrote something in English. If you want me to read it. It's the little smuggler. It's called the little smuggler. Through a hole, through a crack in the cranny, starving yet stubborn and canny, sneaky and speedy like a cat, I daily risk my useful neck. And if I fate will turn against me in that game of life and bread, do not weep for me, mother, do not cry. Are we not all marked to die? Only one worry besets me, living in agony, so nearly dead. Who will care for you tomorrow? Who will bring you, dear Mom, a slice of bread?
I came into Bergen-Belsen, the heaps of the dead people. They were smelling, there were heaps like that, all dead people. I couldn't believe my eyes.
I worked in a cabinet making factory. It was called Killer Factory, and it was owned by a German director, and till clearing out, I finished up in Auschwitz-Birkenau, which I didn't know what day it is, and I was directed to camp where my parents, brothers and sisters, were directed to the gas chambers.
Life got very trying. I had an extremely capable and clever mother, very good looking. She was a blonde. She looked like a Swedish blonde. So she was completely free from any suspicion on the part of the Germans. She could move quite freely. I couldn't because in her unwisdom, I had a little operation, but she was clever enough to take me to a Polish surgeon who reversed it.
I saw a German 2 days before the liberation, 2 young Jewish boys, about 16 years old. They were so handsome, such a lovely boys. They saw a grave over there. They did not know what this was inside. So they went there, and normally on the continent, they put potatoes in there over the winter. They should not get frozen. They went there to grab a potato each. And I can see it now, it's so many years ago. I never forgot. Those bloody German, he shot them both for a miserable potato.
Then I was 4 years in concentration camps, in all different ones. The first one was called big camp, Oskarżysko-Kamienne in Poland, and I was making anti-aircraft bullets. Not just I did one part, not more than one part. But that's what we produced.
And there was only a matter of luck if you go to the left or to the right. Somehow, the blessing of my mother, I survived and I finished up in England. I served in the Israeli army in the officer mess as not a high rank. I was above the corporal.
In fact, I had several very narrow escapes. One which remains in my mind to this day is that was 43, Warsaw. I went out for a walk, and then I heard screams behind me. Halt! Halt! Well, I pretended not to understand German because the average Pole doesn't, and the average Jew does. And I carried on. 2 civilian Gestapo men caught up with me and asked me for my documents. And I had a school identity card, which I showed them. And then they asked me, where do you live? And I said, oh, just over there. They looked at me for a long time and said, you can go. I must say the feeling of relief was absolutely overwhelming, because otherwise it was instant death. Nearest doorway.
This man that taught us, gave us courage, that tall man, after the liberation, a day after the liberation, I went over and I walked across Bergen-Belsen. That it was very big there. They used to keep this for the army, for their army. I see this man, a skeleton, that tall man, lying there on the ground, and he recognized me, and he said to me, Josef, gib mir a stickel Brot, which means, Joe, give me a piece of bread. And he died in front of me. That was this is the only time I went out and I burst out crying, because crying didn't help us.
In Haifa port, illegally, all right? I served in the Chatava Sheva in the 7th Brigade, which was mostly Anglo-Saxon volunteers. And me too.
In England.
And how did it make you feel?
Very proud. And my uncle was a big Zionist, and I come from a family of quite Zionists. I belong to a youth movement in Poland, so I was very proud to put it. And it was absolutely necessary because nobody wanted us after the war, really.
I was on the way, but and my family bought a house in Bnei Brak, Rehov Tveria. But I had an uncle in Paris, so he didn't want me to take the house over. So he stopped me going. You know, I was like all the boys, like this Dundala, the one you interviewed Freeman. So I didn't go. You know, I was on the way, but you know, in those days, easily influenced, you know. And I stayed in England.
When the State of Israel was established, I had a very exciting experience. I was with relatives in London when a lady and her daughter came to visit my relatives. And the daughter said, "I've just put up the flag in the newly established Israel embassy, because today the State of Israel has been declared."
I volunteered to the Israeli army. I did everything I could as a Jew to help my existence and the Jewish survival. How else shall I put it?
I became very aware of the fact that Jewish people were not able to go to the newly created State of Israel, and I joined the first group that was called Shnat Sherut, which was a year service in Israel. And on my first day in Israel, in a kibbutz, I met my husband, who was a camp survivor.
And then I drove tanks into the northern Israel. I drove also to Latrun, armored car. My stupidity is not having remained in Israel.
To my surprise, I go to Israel and I see a German flag in the hotel where I'm staying. So I kicked up a row there. So they came in and they pacified me and they brought me food and they brought me flowers. They says, "Mr. Kirsch, we don't like it either, but we have got to take him in because we are poor. They've given us machine guns to protect ourselves against the Arabs."
When was this?
This was after the liberation, you see.
Proud. It was one of the greatest achievements, especially for us survivors. I mean, we had nowhere to go. I mean, really, our dignity, you know, we sort of, everything was taken away from us. So it was a great thing. The first Prime Minister, I think, was Ben Gurion, and the President was Weizmann. Yes, it was great. But from here, you can't get anybody to come because we all old people now. It's like Nara Yiti becomes a kanti. Younger wasn't, older became.
So why were you so proud? What was so...
Well, coming out of a concentration camps for nothing because we were Jewish, and suddenly we have a state of our own where we could go. Of course, we yearned for it in Poland, which was an anti-Semitic country, where we suffered even before the Germans came, yes? So, and the Poles used to shout at us, go to Palestine, as an insult.
I feel emotionally moved, very powerfully moved. And my only regret is that there is nothing I can do short of supporting certain things in a very minor way, because this is all I can do. If I were a young man, I would go and join the army.
I felt delighted. I thought it was really important that at last there was somewhere for Jewish people to go. My parents, my grandmother, had been murdered, I had felt very little of my Jewish identity throughout my childhood in an English family. And suddenly, I very much wanted to go to Israel.
Oh, I think it's terrific the way Israel progressed in all those years. Now I've got an apartment in Israel. So I was going 3-4 times a year, all through the years, since 1967. I was going to Israel about 3 or 4 times a year on holidays.
I have since been to Israel. I have donated, I think, 3 ambulances. The ambulances cost me £44,000 each.
How did it make you feel? How did you feel when
I
Israel was
felt
established?
when I landed, I've come home. I'm not religious, but I'm very Jewish. I'm very Jewish.
And in Israel, they say, you save a Jewish life, it's like saving the whole country. And that gave me a really great pleasure.
I'm very proud, of course. I cannot understand the Jew who isn't proud of it, because for us this was something. For us, the Germans made it to wear us a armband with a Magen David. It was a badge of shame. So this is quite a difference, isn't it?
Well, I'm very proud of Israel, and I think what they achieved is tremendous. And what I read and what I know from the internet, that they have the most scientists, the most libraries, and the most Nobel Prizes, and they are very good whatever they do. They're very clever people, and medically as well, very advanced. Yes, they did a lot.
I'm very glad to know that there is a state of Israel, especially after the experiences of the Holocaust, where my family were murdered, and I feel that it's necessary for Jewish people to have a state of their own.
There's nothing to explain because it's a shame for me to say I am a Zionist. It's a shame. How can I be not a Zionist with all my backgrounds? And the word Zionism belongs to people that had to be convinced to believe in Israel. I wasn't. I was just stupid in wandering around the world without any means.
But when Israel gets negative, you've seen Israel getting negative press sometimes.
Yes.
How does that make you feel?
Well, it depends what the press is. I wouldn't say that you're not allowed to criticize Israel. Of course we can criticize, but it has to be there. Okay, criticize as much as you like, but don't be a self-hating Jew. That's a different story.
And it's such a pity that they can't get a peace with the Arabs, to live in peace with them. After all, there's enough land all over there. Just they should have to fight all those years still for their livelihood, to be able to have peace in mind.
I wish that the state of Israel was able to exist in conditions that were more equal to the Arab population who were living there for a very long time and still live there. I'm not happy when I see Arab vineyards being destroyed or olive groves, but I do realize that Israel needs to be secure, and it's a dilemma which I think everybody faces, and I wish I knew of a just solution to this problem.
My colleague said that you were there when Eichmann was. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes. What happened, I was in Brazil. My friend Arya Friedman, he was the mechanic on the aeroplanes, and they knew where Eichmann was, so they broke into Eichmann and they gave him a small injection that put him to sleep. They then, when they were ready, the Israelis, they dressed him, they knew how tall he was, so they had a uniform from the Israeli soldiers, the size of it. They gave him a small injection and they put him in that uniform, and two Israelis with soldiers were marching him through. And the customs said, "What is the matter with him?" "Oh, he had a bit too much to drink, so we've taken him over. He's drunk." But he wasn't drunk. And I saw him on the aeroplane. And the Israelis came over and they said to me and to my friend, "Now you can do with him what you want." My friend looked at him. He said, "Let him go to hell." I came to Israel. They took him out. And they put him by the water there. They hoisted him up and they hung him. And even when they were hanging him, he still shouted out, "Heil Hitler." And I saw the death of it. And that was something I will always remember.
Yes and no. I would like it. I like the way it progressed, but at the moment, the people who are in Israel don't think as much like we did. To us, Israel was, to have the country was like some fight for first independence of Israel. I said at the time to friends, if my father would have known that his son fought for the first independence of Israel, he will wake up again. No, I didn't know how it would be. I mean, could you? You didn't know it's in a very difficult situation now. You see now the Arabs, they're picking on the prisoners now. They're only picking to get publicity, to keep pressure on Israel, And they are now, because now Syria, it's quieting down. So they were lying low. So now they're going to create trouble all the time. It'll be difficult years to come to overcome them.
Well, it changed so much because it was established by pioneers, by really socialists, and now it's sort of completely changed. So I don't approve of everything, but it has to be, and it evolves like any other country. So if something is wrong, we hope it will get better.
Unfortunately, it isn't. 65 years ago, I went to live on a kibbutz. I felt that this was going to be an amazing society. And as somebody who's not religious and secular in my views, I'm very disappointed to see the growth of the very extreme religious faction in the country. I have nothing against people being religious, but I feel angry when I see women forced to go to the back of buses and be treated as second-class citizens in a country which I believe is a democratic country.
No, Israel is it's a miracle. It's a miracle. What they have done in that few years, it's remarkable.
I didn't think Israel would get to such a preeminent position in the Middle East, because when you look at the map, you see a tiny little drop. That's all it is.
Well, we never knew that Israel will be a strong country. We did not expect Israel should be able to defend themselves against so many enemies.
What is it about Israel that you love?
You just being a survivor. You at least we've got our own nation. We have been wounded, humiliated, killed, so, and now we gives us it's tremendous as a survivor. It's you can't explain. It gives you dignity, that you've got somebody. If anything, they'll protect us like they did in the Entebbe.
My story is a story of triumph, and it's not a story of skeletons and corpses and gas chambers, because I got off scot-free. And there were moments of horrendous danger. Sorry.
No, please continue.
And this gave me a great deal of self-confidence.
So do you think the fact your story wasn't one of corpses and skeletons, that whereas others may have been, that you don't feel the same connection to Israel that others may have felt? Do you think that's maybe...
It's possible. It's quite possible.
Well, I think it had become very much Americanized, sort of. You see, where it's very sort of, I would call it capitalist, and not what I went to Israel for, really. And also, I think that the Orthodox religious have too much say, maybe. But that's because I'm not that religious.
We always said, when we survive the Holocaust people, we should meet in Israel. And they gave us, each survivor, a lit candle, and we were marching through like a tunnel to come there, you see, to leave. And there was Menachem Begin, a little Jew. He was standing right on the top there. And we could not believe a little man like that could have done so much. Yes, it was something to remember forever.
I am not concerning with socialism and capitalism and kibbutznik or not kibbutznik. I'm only concerned we have a state. And thank God for that. If it's red, green, or pink, it doesn't matter. We have a state. And we have somewhere to hide and somewhere to hide from. That's all that matters. Don't ask me about Zionism. It's silly. How can I say I am a Zionist? The word doesn't apply to such an idiot like me, traveling around the world and not even made up his mind where I belong. Silly.